Hello, and welcome. My name is Sabrina Victoria, and I am here with an amazing woman named Laura. And we are going to be talking all about eating, specifically binge eating. Super excited about this. I know that this is something that so many individuals are plagued with, men and women worldwide. So we're going to be jumping into this subject here as we speak. Super excited about it. So let's jump right in.
Get ready, because today's guest is about to change the way you view your world. This is Her Talk Show, hosted by Sabrina Victoria.
That was a little bit of procrastination there because I couldn't find my video. If you're listening live, I see you jumping on. If you're listening on the replay, make sure you hashtag replay wherever you're at so we can send you some love in the comments. We are here every single day, delving deep into the realms of health, wealth, and leadership with some of the most brilliant women globally. We have interviewed over 600 women. It's probably close to 650 now. And today we are adding another one to the list. Since 2015, Laura has helped transform over 120 clients' relationships with food. What, girl? She is a health coach and facilitator of the research-based Truce with Food process, which helps people get to the bottom of why they self-sabotage and fall off track so they can stop obsessively thinking about food once and for all. Welcome, lady.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
Yes, girl. So why are we talking about food? How in the world did you get into this niche?
I feel like a lot of people in the self-development space have had their own experience. And so I had mine. I struggled with my weight since I was 12 and would do every diet, lose weight, gain it all back plus more. And what's interesting is I never even thought about relationship with food. Like I just thought that because people in my life had struggled with their weight and their eating, that's just the way things were. And so I went through my whole own journey around losing weight, gaining it all back. And in 2008, it took me a few years, but I was finally able to lose 60 pounds and was keeping that off, working in advertising. And even as I was working in advertising, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next, didn't know what that was, learned about health coaching, decided to get my certification. And while I was getting my certification as a health coach, I thought that as I was getting more information, I would be able to sustain my weight even better, or really my eating would shift. And what ended up happening is at the beginning of getting my certification, I actually started gaining weight, and I'm like, what is going on? And I just happened to be introduced to another health coach who had successfully been running a business for a few years. So I started talking to her about how she was doing that, and was talking to her more from a business perspective. But as I was talking to her, learned about her process called Truce with Food. And I was like, hold on a second here. Wait, what is this? Like, this is not just about the food. There's more that's leading me to think about food, to work the system where I'd eat well for a while, say, screw it, eat whatever I wanted, have to rein it back in again, and then lose any weight that I had gained. And I thought that's just the way things were supposed to be. And once I started talking to her and learning about Truce with Food, I was like, oh, I think I need this. So I started going through the process for myself. And it was so eye-opening to realize that being bullied in middle school and high school was still having an impact on me years later, even though I never thought that. I thought that it just made me stronger, and it didn't really impact me anymore. And I had no idea that was still causing me to react, and specifically around food. So went through the process and decided that that's what I really wanted to do to help my clients, to help them with their relationship with food. And I can go into a lot more. I really truncated that because there's a lot more through that journey, but that's how I got to where I am.
I love that. And congrats on all the success.
Thank you.
I know that you talk a lot about how unsuccessful diets are, and how I think you said like 95% of
Mhm.
diets are unsuccessful. Why is
Yep.
that? Why is that, and why are we all on diets then?
I mean, diet culture is a thing, right? Like it is such a big thing in our society. And there, a lot of times diets are focusing on the wrong thing. And I don't want to say the wrong thing completely, because there is value to some of like the structure, and there are some things that can be helpful for people. What often they are missing is that they are focusing on more tactics. So if you've ever done some of like the major weight loss programs, it's like, if you have a craving at night, brush your teeth, chew a piece of gum, phone a friend, take a bubble bath. And the reason that those might help temporarily is, but not like long term, and you might still have the craving afterwards, is because it's not actually addressing the issue, right? Like, why are you thinking obsessively about Ben and Jerry's, or why can you not just have one cookie, and when you're not even hungry? So what we really need to do, and what diets often miss, is we really need to look at what is actually driving the cravings that you're having, that doesn't probably have anything to do with the food itself, or even lack of willpower or discipline. Because my guess is that most people who are listening have a lot of willpower and discipline in so many other areas. So why is it that we are lacking it around food? And that's another thing with diets, is it's often like, if you don't stick to the plan to a T, it's very black and white, all or nothing. If you don't stick to it with a T, it's a you problem, right? You're failing. You don't have enough discipline or willpower. But what if it's not really about discipline or willpower? And we can talk about that a little bit more.
If it's not about discipline or willpower, then why do people eat out of alignment?
Often, and it depends on the person, there can be the physiological piece of it. So like lack of blood sugar control and things like that, or like not getting enough sleep, which can impact our blood sugar. But a lot of the work that I do is really focused on the emotional stuff. So if we're turning to food to center safety, to as a sense of belonging, if it's all a form of protection, really. And so if we don't address that, then the food isn't, you're not going to be able to keep up your willpower. So I think of it as little minnows that are like nibbling away at our willpower throughout the day when we have these stressors. So an example could be, you look in the mirror and, or you, let me say, like you try on a outfit or a piece of clothing and it doesn't fit. And you internalize that and make that mean something about you. Then you have a really tough project at work that you are avoiding doing because there's a risk that you may not do it perfectly. And then you have a phone call from your kid's school that your kid has been misbehaving. What does that trigger in you? So there's all of these stressors throughout the day that are nibbling away at your willpower. And it's like, by the time the evening comes around after dinner, you have to press the release valve. And it's like, hello food, right? Because it's like the way to like replenish and refuel and to get some sort of satisfaction if you've been lacking it throughout the day as well. So it's kind of an example of how it can, some of the things that can drive our eating that don't really have anything to do with lack of willpower.
Yeah, I had heard somewhere that the human brain can only make 20 decisions a day. And when we go past that, and that includes everything, that's like, what should I wear today? Or like, should I put on lipstick or not put on lipstick? Like, those are all decisions.
And
So
what
the
should you eat?
average person goes well above and beyond 20.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes sense. So these are the stressors or the decisions, because a decision is, a stressor most of the time.
Yeah. And it's also, what are these things triggering in you, right? Or like, what are you making it mean about you that your clothes didn't fit, that the presentation was hard, that your kid was misbehaving? What are you making that mean about you? And then that can lead to feeling all of these stressors and stuff. And it's decisions, but it's also what is that what is that triggering in you, or what is that making you, what is that bringing up in you?
Interesting. I so appreciate that. When we're talking about what you're making that mean about you, we're talking
Mhm.
about your worth, you're talking about your value. How does somebody start to shift that mindset?
It is definitely a process for sure. The first thing is even seeing and identifying that you are making meaning, and where it is that you're feeling at risk, or what are you making it mean about you? Because a lot of times we're subjected to the the meanings that we're making, and once we can identify that we're even making meaning, then it's an object that's outside of ourselves that can change. So just even being able to identify, if let's go back to, like, I'll use those three examples again of like the clothes not fitting, the presentation, or the hard project in your kids. If all of that, each of those may be different, but if that's triggering in you of feeling inadequate, for instance, or maybe feeling a risk of exposure, because if you're in a body that you're not comfortable with and wearing clothes that may not fit, that can feel exposing. Or if you do a project imperfectly, that may be exposing. And your kid not behaving could be exposing. And so just being able to identify that, name it, and be able to actually put language to that, it can be really relieving for people to realize, like, oh, this is what's actually happening and what's driving my eating, versus, which is a shift, right? Instead of thinking like, I'm the problem, I'm to blame, there's something wrong with me. Now it's like, oh, there's all these triggers that are leading me down this path of these behaviors. And then it's being able to pause, not react right away, and to see, like, is this risk really real? Or is it just more of a perceived risk that I could be seen as inadequate
Mm.
or exposed?
So perception versus reality.
Yes, it's a part of it for sure.
Yeah. So how do we do that though? How does somebody step out of how they are perceiving it and step into what is actually real?
One way to do it is, we look at our eating as a symptom. So anytime you have food noise, whether that's like those obsessive thoughts around food, having some guilt or shame around what you're eating, if you eat out of alignment with your goals and have some binge eating or self-sabotage, however it shows up for you, once that happens after the fact, you can pause and look back and see, what were all of the circumstances or situations that were happening, and what was that triggering in me? How was I feeling? And how does my eating actually make sense? And that can get us starting to think about all of these triggers and things that lead up to us eating. And even if it happens after the fact, that's, once we have some distance and space from it, that's really valuable information, so that you can hopefully start to catch it sooner and sooner, which takes a lot of, it seems like a simple, or it seems simple, but it's not easy, of a process to do. But the more that we do that and can reflect on it, then hopefully the goal is that you can catch it earlier and earlier. And ultimately, eventually it'll happen. You'll be able to identify what's happening before you eat. But right now, even if it happens after the fact, that can be really helpful.
Mm. As far as the actual act of binge eating, do you talk at all about, I guess, what the individual decides to have around them in their house?
Sometimes, but ultimately, as we do the work and figure out what is driving our eating, the goal is to no longer, what tends to happen is our eating tends to fall into place. And so then it's that we're not even triggered by the food. So I know that there's a lot of people who have their trigger foods, and they can't have it around, which is fine for right now. Ultimately, we want to be able to get to a place where you can have the food around, and you can eat a little bit of it and move on from it and not feel like you can't stop. And part of that is as you are centering, as you figure out different ways to center safety or feel that sense of belonging in other places around those that are important to you or to yourself, however, wherever it feels like it's lacking right now, then the food tends to fall into place. And so as I went through my whole journey around my relationship with food, what was fascinating is as I was still working in advertising, I walked by, there were a bunch of donuts in the kitchen one day. And I walked by them and I was like, cool donuts. I was like, I really am craving some carrots right now. And I had to do a double take, pinch myself. And I was like, who am I and what is going on? Because I used to love donuts and would want to sample every little one and have bites of them. And the fact that I was no longer didn't even want the donuts, didn't even feel called to them, and was actually thinking about the carrots, like that was such a crazy experience. But I have clients who say the same thing where they like food is no longer front and center and they can be around it. They can have some of the favorite foods around them. They can have a little bit of it, move on from it. And it's no longer really like a trigger food.
Wow. Celeste has a question. Does going to a nutritionist along with a therapist help with binge eating?
It definitely can. It depends on, I would say it depends on like the nutritionist as well as the therapist. I do have clients who work with therapists along with the work that I do, as well as a nutritionist can be helpful to address more of what you're eating and how it works well with your body. Sometimes with therapy, it depends on the therapist. Not all of them know about the relationship with food. And so I've had a lot of therapists actually refer clients to me because they can only help so much with people and like with people's relationship with food. And a lot of times we do bring up a lot of stuff from the past, and there can be some, if there's been some trauma or something like that in somebody's life, then that may contribute to their eating as well. And so that's where it can be helpful to have a therapist involved as well. So the three of us can work really well together, and therapy can be really helpful. And it depends on the therapist as well. Same with the nutritionist too.
Yeah, I could see that. For those that don't know about this, and for those that maybe don't binge eat, but maybe know someone in their family who binge eats, what is a food trigger? You've said that during the podcast.
Yeah. So the way I think of a food trigger is where it feels like you are, and it's more of like how you're thinking about food. So it can be obsessively thinking about what you're eating. And I would say too that all of this, it may be related to binge eating, and sometimes it could be eating when you're not hungry, or it could be mindlessly eating. This can also apply beyond just food, just an FYI, but we are focused on food today. But the trigger food is really, in diet culture, trigger food is something that you just can't stop eating, and like it turns into a binge. When I'm thinking about our triggers, or it's really more of like that obsession, the obsessive thoughts around what we're eating, and feeling like we have an insatiable hunger as well.
I feel like I might have that issue with white bread. Like white bread that you would get like at a restaurant that you would dip in oil, like that type of bread. I just cannot get enough of it. Like once I start eating it, I just cannot stop eating it. So much so that I'm like aware of it and I just avoid it completely. Like I don't even have a smidge of it at dinner because like I'll avoid my whole meal and just eat the bread.
That's so interesting. What do you love about the bread?
Well, the bread, it isn't just the bread. It is the oil and the oregano and the salt and everything with the bread. I don't know. It's just warm and it just makes me feel good. It's so delicious to eat.
Yeah. So what's interesting, and I don't know if you want to dive into this or not, but there's a lot of metaphor in the way that we talk about food and how we eat. So some of the things that you just mentioned is like it's warm, and of course there's like the delicious and stuff. But and when I think of bread and carbs, I also think it's like it kind of expands too, right? So it can be really like filling. It can be comforting. It can be grounding. So does it tend to, when you have the bread, do you eat bread other times, or is it just around at restaurants um, that you eat it?
I don't, if I didn't have this issue, I would eat it all the time. But I don't ever eat it. I don't ever have it in my house. Yeah, so restaurants, like Italian, you know what I mean? Like Italian or like steak houses or Italian
Yeah.
restaurants where they have the bread.
Hmm.
That's it.
I mean, I love warm bread too. um, what with like the warmth and the beyond just like that warmth and the taste and everything, what else do you love about the bread?
The center is mushy and the outside is not. So I always eat the outside first and then save the center for last, and then I soak it extra in the oil and the oregano and the salt, eat it.
Yum.
I will also mention though, since we're diving into this, which I didn't know you were
Hmm.
gonna do, white bread was actually a trigger for the very first time I binged and purged.
Mm.
I ate so much bread at dinner one time. I have that thing where, like, you get headaches if you don't eat.
Hmm.
So, I was, like, at a point in the day where, like, I hadn't eaten and I could feel a hunger headache coming on, so I was just, like, eating all the bread, plus I like the bread,
Hmm.
and then they sat a plate of chicken in front of me, and I had already eaten, like, 8 rolls of bread, for real, and I'm like, "I don't have any room for this meal." And I felt like a dork not eating anything. So I went into the bathroom and I literally threw up all the bread. And that started like a 9-month, 10-month binge purge every single day because it just, I was like, oh my gosh, I just ate it. It tasted so good. And then I could just purge it.
Hmm.
Um, it actually got really bad. So that I think also has a lot to do with it, is it kind of like brings me back to that, the ease
Hmm.
of enjoying calories, but not having the calories necessarily all of it go into me.
Hmm. Yeah. And so I don't want to, like, if this is triggering for you, and
No, not at
also
all.
we should also mention a trigger warning for those listening in case anybody does struggle with an eating disorder. Like, we just want to make sure that people know that we're talking about that. Um, but at that time, with like leading up to when you were eating those 8 rolls, um, do you remember like where you were, what was kind of going on in life leading up to that? And not just at the dinner, right? Like that's more, this is where we're looking at the 8 rolls as a symptom of something else. So I'm curious as to what else was happening in your life and at that time.
I was in an extremely narcissistic relationship with a man who was 11 years older than me. I mean, it was pretty traumatic. I did
Mhm.
a whole TED talk on it.
And so thinking about that, if we think about the roles and how that turned into the binge and purge cycle, when looking back, why did it make sense, or how does it make sense that that ended up, that the bread was came into your life in that way?
I don't have an answer for that because it was there before I met him too. It just so happened that it triggered that day with a binge
Mhm.
purge.
So something that I don't know if this is the case for you or not, but something that comes up for people around binge eating is when we're feeling unfulfilled or unsatisfied in other places of our life, and thinking about like the bread, especially when we were talking about how like it expands and it can be like almost heavy and grounding in a way, is sometimes like the binging or eating when we aren't necessarily hungry can come up because we're feeling a lack of satisfaction or fulfillment. And so an example is, there was a client that I was working with who was in a relationship that was not healthy for, like, she wasn't feeling good about it. She was accommodating a lot. She, like, it just wasn't a great situation. And when we talked about her binging, I asked her if she was feeling unsatisfied or like if her cup was feeling empty. And she's like, Laura, my cup is broken. It is so empty that it's just oozing everywhere. And so if you think about that, like think about a cup with a lot of holes, right? And as you're eating stuff, it's just oozing out of those holes. And so you don't ever feel satisfied. And the reason, this is where like that trigger food comes in, right? Because it's not, again, really about the food. But if you think of that visual and that metaphor of like eating, but it just keeps oozing out, that's why it is insatiable, because it's not really that you have this hunger for chips or cookies or bread. It's more of that it's oozing out and you're not getting that satisfaction because it's not actually filling you up, because it's not the food that you need, or it's not, the food isn't what you're actually craving or need. And so I'm wondering if that is kind of what was happening with the bread, even, where
what
like
a great analogy.
Yeah, it seems to land for people often. And like I said, there's a lot of metaphor with how we're eating.
Yeah. I love that. I absolutely love that visual. Obviously I would have to sit in that to feel that. But yeah, I could see that for myself in situations, and I 100% know I can see that for other people that I know that do that. Um, so I know you kind of talked a little bit about self-worth and value. How do we begin to patch up the holes?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a process for sure. And even again, like the first step is to see that, and a lot of times I think there's a lot of guilt and shame around our eating or our bodies as well, because we have, and this is something that diet culture has created for a lot of us, and media and everything too, is that the size of our body, how our body looks, is tied to our self-worth. And what we want to be able to do is to start to separate that. And one way to do that is really we've been socialized in many ways around values and what's important to us. We take that on from media and from our families of origin. It can be from a coach if you were in sports, from our religious institutions. It can come from so many different places. And often there's a values gap between what we truly value and the values that were instilled in us. And so thinking back to not wanting to be exposed or being seen as inadequate, we may think that what we value is being accepted. And what you may actually value is connection. And so as we can start to identify where the gap is between what your values are right now and how you're living, and where there's a gap from what is really actually important to you, that's where we can start to reclaim parts of ourselves and parts of our identity that we had to cast off to belong. And that's when we can start to reclaim a lot of that self-worth and stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love this acceptance worth versus connection. Yeah, those are so close yet so different.
Mm-hmm.
So I could see a gap there 100%. Well, I took a whole page of notes. This has been so insightful. I so appreciate you coming on, sharing with us. We have a ton of people watching live. Thank you so much for being here. For those watching on the replay, make sure that you are getting in the comments and letting us know that you are here listening, so we can send you some love. Laura, I would love to ask, obviously we have a really good idea of what you do, but can you tell us exactly what you do for your clients? Um, who should be reaching out to you? Who do you help?
So the people I really help are those that have really struggled with their relationship with food for a long time, typically. They typically have so much information, they could teach nutrition courses. Um, and they know what to eat, but they're just not consistently sticking with it, and they don't know why. They have a sense that there's something beyond just the food, but they don't know what that is. And so those are the people that I really help to get to the bottom of what's actually driving their eating, that and to see what is contributing to that. So if you have a lot of information and are frustrated and don't really want to do another diet, but you're not sure what will help you and want to feel more comfortable and confident in your body, then that's who I tend to work with. And the way that I do that is through the Truce with Food process, which is it's a 6-month process that we go through. There's a whole framework where we're really getting clear on what is really driving your eating, that story. So really looking at those triggers and that meaning that you're making of different situations, and really shifting out of the binary of the black and white, all or nothing thinking, into what we call getting into an option C and more of that moderate middle, and getting into like those values that are really important to you, so that then you can start to be more in the driver's seat instead of the passenger seat in life, and also around food.
Beautiful. Celeste came back with the one more question as we're closing up here. In our culture, we gather around food. Give us ideas on ways to not be caught up in the food trap when you're at those gatherings.
That's such a great point too, is that food, there is connection around food. Like there's so many different reasons that we eat, and we don't want to lose that either. So one of the things when you're in a gathering is to really think about what is important to you, and what do you, how do you want it to end? Often when I ask people what's important to them around the social gatherings and stuff, when we're going in, food tends to be like front and center and the star of the show. But when I ask people what's important to them, usually it is about the connection, or like it's connecting with the people that's around you. And when you really think about that, and if connection is what's really important to you in those situations, then the food tends to take is no longer front and center. It can still be important, but it may not be the thing that we're focusing on. And so sometimes just even being clear on what's important to you, how you want the the gathering to end, can be really helpful, so that to see what ends up happening and what happens with the food. And I have an example of that for my own life if we have time, or if you want me to share. But that's one way to address that.
Beautiful. Yeah, anyone who's interested in hearing more about that, make sure you drop in, contact Laura, and she'll be able to dive deeper into that. Laura, where can people find you on social media? Where do you hang out? Website, all the things.
Yeah, my website's laurabfolks.com, and I am on Facebook at Laura B. Folks, on Instagram at laurab.folks, and then also have my YouTube channel and everything. One thing that may be helpful for people is I do have a masterclass that's 45 minutes that's pre-recorded that goes into a lot more detail around this, and also around, we've talked a lot about what diets often miss, but it goes into more detail, as well as goes into more detail about the Truce with Food process as well.
Gorgeous. Where can people find that on your website?
Yes, that's on my website as well.
Awesome. So her website is Laura B as in bear folks.com. It isn't a clickable link in the description wherever you are watching us at. And then obviously follow her on social media so you can get her in your feed on a constant basis. To those that are really resonating, and make sure that we connect. We love to make sure that we are connecting with our guests here on her talk shows so that we can all learn and rise together. Any closing thoughts, Laura, as we wrap up here?
Thank you so much for having me on. I always love having these conversations. And yeah, I think the biggest thing is just know that it can feel really isolating and lonely to struggle with our relationship with food, and just know that you're not alone. There are other people who are going through it. I've been through it myself, and it is possible for that to shift and to change as well.
Beautiful. Well, that brings us to an end of yet another incredible episode of Her Talk Show. Thank you, Laura, for being here and sharing your wisdom and inspiring us all.
Thank you so
To our
much for having
dedicated,
me.
go ahead.
I was just going to say thank you so much for having me, and thank you for also being vulnerable as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. To our dedicated listeners, thank you for staying with us until the very end. Remember to follow, like, and share. Once again, I am your host, Sabrina Victoria, and I invite you to join our amazing community, Her Nation, where we continue to have conversations just like this one to help us lift up and thrive.